Hello and welcome to another Huddle Breakdown. Only two of us on the show this week. We are a man down. James has succumbed to injury, so it's me and Alan holding things up. How are you doing, Alan?
Yeah, good, all good. Busy week ahead. Lots of things that we are getting down for putting on the channel. So obviously, hopefully people are still enjoying this free-to-air podcast. But a reminder that, on Thursday, Friday, we had Joel from the Hearts Standard on to review the Hearts game. Which was excellent, as most of the guests, all the guests really that we've had so far are. And if you want to get similar podcasts with similar guests, then please subscribe to the channel, and you'll get not just that additional end of week podcast, which previews the weekend ahead, but also reviews any of the midweek games. So, for example, the Bruges game coming up now will be reviewed on Thursday. Posted out on Friday. So if you don't want to miss that and you've not subscribed, please do. And then also is all the written content. So I've just posted up the match report from the match stat pack from the Hearts game, which we'll discuss now. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's stats in there you won't get from Opta, you won't get from StatsBomb, you won't get from any of the commercial vendors or even free-to-air vendors, and obviously it was a fascinating game. All the not just the team data, but you get all the breakdown of all the player data as well. James posted a piece this morning looking at Engels and the comparison between his domestic form and his Champions League form. That's a great piece. The last piece I put up was on the end of the last week, which was a really long, deep dive into Reo Hatate. So if you want to see how Hatate stacks up against the likes of Matt O'Reilly, Aaron Moy, David Turnbull, as well as Engels and Bernardo and so forth. Again, to get that, you'll need to subscribe to the channel. So hopefully, you like this enough that you want more, and there's not enough geekery in your life, and you want a bit more spreadsheet shagging in your life. So get signed up, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side.
Yes, absolutely. Plenty of content there. And another thing I was going to say was, obviously, Alan's mentioned the specials and things that we are doing in the future. We are approaching people as we speak. We have some lined up already in terms of guests that we want to speak to on the podcast. If you've got any suggestions or anybody you would like to see us speak to, then the least we can do is ask the question, and we'll do that. So if you want to get in touch with us and say, I'd really like to hear so-and-so's thoughts on one thing or another, then get in touch and let us know, and we will try and get them on the show. Alan, you mentioned obviously that your latest piece on thehuddlebreakdown.com was in relation to the Hearts game. The first couple of lines of that report opened up with it being that old cliche of a game in two halves, and it certainly was. What was your thoughts overall of the game so far?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, cliches become cliches because they're well used, and they're well used because they tend to happen a lot. And this really was a classic off the genre, as they say. So, yeah, listen, it was I kind of watched it late on Saturday. I was out all day, and so I got to the game pretty late. So, and I was kind of frustrated watching it in real time, as it were, as a fan, in terms of, I seemed to be always looking at the left-hand side of the screen in the first half, and just sort of Celtic, Carter Vickers to McGregor to Trusty to Schmeichel. I think I tweeted out today, Schmeichel completed, I think, something like 39 passes in that first half. To put that into context, Fraser Forster would average less than 20 in a whole game in his time at Celtic. So this is the benefit of having a sort of sweeper keeper, a good keeper with a ball at the feet, is you've got that continuity of play. You can control the ball easily, even at the back. So I think there were a few hairy moments. Obviously, I think very early in the game, Hearts managed to break Celtic down a couple of times. There was some nice interplay between Shankland and Spittle in the first sort of couple of minutes, really, which presented them with probably the best chance of the game in the first couple of minutes. After that, their chances were a little bit less clear-cut. Shankland had a couple, one from a good cutback, and obviously they were getting a lot of joy, and this was unusual. So most teams attack Celtic down Celtic's left-hand side, but Hearts got tremendous joy with the combination of Blair Spittle, who, as we've said on the show many times, is one of the better attacking, creative players outside of the top two, certainly. And his partnership with Penrice, who's a very kind of attacking-minded, aggressive runner, good energy to his game. They create a lot of trouble for Celtic down that right hand side, which is normally Celtic pretty steady down there. But Johnson was kind of struggling and a bit overloaded. Coyne, who's normally pretty sound defensively as well. Engels again pretty solid, but the Hearts players did really well down that side. I think Penrice set up 3 chances in that first half, all of them I think from Spittle. What we call secondary assisting passes, but as the game went on, the kind of that threat dissipated somewhat, and the second half was clearly a very different beast completely. And actually, if you look at the XG chart, the XG race chart, if you look at the packing chart, which are both in the stats pack, by the way, you'll see it literally at half time. Hearts are leading on both those key metrics. Both of them strong predictors. The guy from Impact, which is the company that devised packing, told me that if you look at games which have a positive result, i.e., one team wins or another, therefore discounting draws, then the team with the highest packing score wins in 80% of occasions. I think for XG, it's about 75%. So they're both strong predictors for outcome, but that completely switched in the second half. And it would be interesting to get Hearts supporting thoughts on whether that was Celtic upping the tempo, or whether it was the Hearts players really running out of steam. Because, as we said on the preview, they are a team desperately lacking in pace. So you don't necessarily need pace to hold a good shape, which they did. And they went with a very quite high, actually, aggressive 4-3-3 matched up on Celtic. But they did push really high. And very successful in that first half. But, it's a bit like the Kilmarnock game. They had a very similar number of pressures, like an insane number, like well over 200. Celtic had like 120 pressures on the ball. That's a lot of effort you're putting into the game there. I suspect most of them were in that first half. And I just think they didn't have the legs, they didn't have the energy really to sustain that. And Celtic were then very comfortable in that second half and wrapped up excellent chances.
We'll move on to the second half in a wee second, but I wanted to go back to something you touched on at the very start. I don't want to put you on the spot, but here we go.
You will.
But I will. You mentioned about the distribution ability of Kasper Schmeichel and the fact that he likes to, or he can handle the ball and he can distribute the ball well. There's a lot of discussion around, obviously, the more old-fashioned types like to say, I just like a goalkeeper who can stop shots, whereas I think some people are starting to come round to the idea that having a goalkeeper who can distribute the ball, especially with a team like Celtic who have so much possession, it can be a key part of the game. How important do you find it in the analysis that you do? What difference does it make having a goalkeeper who has that in their arsenal?
Yeah, so this isn't my research, and because it isn't, I've not needed to do it. But there's at least a couple of papers, and I'll try and dig out the links, which have looked at what is the difference between going long from the goalkeeper versus playing out from the back, and essentially, sort of long story short, is if you play out long, then generally what's going to happen is your players are kind of are facing your own goal, and the opposing players are kind of facing your goal as well. So they've got the advantage in terms of facing the right way relative to the direction of the ball. So it's much easier to judge a ball when you're coming forward onto the ball than it is to judge a ball when you're both going in the same direction and you're travelling backwards. So there's just a physics and human capability and brain processing thing going on there. Then the second thing is you're essentially what you're doing if you're going to punt the ball. What's going to happen unless it kind of and it's not kids football, right? So that the ball generally doesn't bounce. Somebody will come and challenge for it in the middle of the field, and therefore essentially you've got a duel situation. And in a headed duel situation, it's a really random thing. Even if you've got like I don't know, a 6'4" defender up against Kyogo. If Kyogo makes his life difficult by jumping into the defender, getting his elbow into his ribs, just being generally awkward, you still, it's very difficult to predict where the ball's going to go, even with that height disparity. So you end up with a sort of randomness factor that you've introduced into the game. And so I suppose when you're Celtic and you've clearly got the quality advantage over the opposition, probably in every position on the field. Why would you throw that away and randomize it into a headed duel where you don't know what's going to happen? And what research is showing, and this is in English Premier League games and top 5 leagues, is that if you throw the ball long from the goalkeeper, because of the randomness that you introduce and the fact you're more likely to have given away possession, the probability of conceding a goal from the phases that follow that are much increased versus if you played the ball out from the back, and even allowing for the fact that sometimes you'll pass the, you'll do a Starfelt and pass the ball to somebody right in front of the 18-yard box type of thing. Even allowing for all that, right, you're still better off playing out from the back. Now, if you think about Celtic, the way that they play, and again, the quality advantage that they have, it makes sense to do that. I mean, when I was watching the game, I'm going to be very honest here. I was thinking, because we were so reluctant to throw the ball forward on occasion, but we did actually try. We'd actually try a lot of straight through balls over the top. We did actually try a lot of those, not from the goalkeeper, but from the midfielders especially. I did wonder, and our pack at half time, our pack passing, we completed a lot of passes, obviously, but only 8% of our passes were pack passes. Now, that's about half what the normal rate is. And Hearts had about 16%, which is about average, what Celtic usually do in a game. So we were definitely being very conservative with the ball. I did wonder if we were kind of doing as James would say, doing the old rope-a-dope and just kind of, lulling them really and generally tiring them out. But you see that could be an outcome bias. That could be sort of planting that thought in people's heads, and it might seem clever because Celtic ended up beating a tired team 4-1. But there may well have been a little bit of Celtic just going, do you know what? We're not going to panic. We're going to keep the ball. You keep pressing. You keep pressing. You keep pressing. We're confident that we're going to wear you down eventually. There may have been a bit of that. There may have been as well. In James's piece and in my piece on Hatate, we've talked a little bit about Engels in particular. He's not great at showing for the ball in midfield. He's not easily found through the lines. Hatate is good when it works, but it doesn't. He's not all. He can often get bumped off the ball as well. But he's probably better in that regard for sure. And McGregor was very deep. So, were there not enough options? And rather than just punt it speculatively, it seemed to be and I'm sure it was orders, to just keep the ball rather than just go, I'm sure Coyne will make a move, I'll just punt it generally in his direction. We didn't do a lot of that. So I felt that we were deliberately keeping the ball and deliberately maintaining control. But as I said many times this season, what you've got to appreciate with Celtic is just that level of calmness, that level of not panicking that has been there all season. It's been there all season, and apart from Dortmund, where you could argue we still tried to stay true to themselves, even as the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh goals went in. It's not as if they were panicking. It was just a completely shit way of trying to play. So there could be something in that literally. We just thought, you know what, this little storm is going to blow itself out.
Yeah, we can laugh about Dortmund now. I can assure you, I wasn't laughing at the time. But I appreciate what you're saying about the almost putting possession down to the flip of a coin if you punt it up the park and put it into a headed duel. It's just, I think, the confirmation bias in is when you're a casual observer, those times when, as you say, Starfelt passes it across the box and loses possession, they stick out an awful lot more than the times when we lose a duel up the park and suffer a counter-attack or something. So there's a bit of confirmation bias going on there, I think, when people complain about one over the other. But certainly from a statistical and from a logical point of view, you can see why a lot of managers have gone down that route. Some shouldn't, actually, because some of them don't have the players to carry out those types of passes and things like that. But the less said about that, the better.
So just Laura,
Let's
sorry,
yes.
Laura, just to finish that off then. So I'm just quickly checking what our season's average is. But during the match, we did actually try 17 through balls. So that was longer passes from distance, trying to get over the top to the quicker players. Now, I think 17's a high number. If you just bear with me, I'm doing some spreadsheet, not shagging, obviously, but spreadsheet nerdling. Some nerdling is going on in the background where I try and find what the average might be. This is real time analysis, people.
Wow.
This is almost worth paying for. Actually, it
Yes,
really is.
exactly. Well, while you're doing your nerdling, I'll let everybody know that I had one eye on the Celtic game, the other was watching Strictly Come Dancing, because that is my this stupid 7:45 kickoff on a Saturday night was messing with my schedule. Now, some people might have thought I was above things like Strictly Come Dancing, but I'm afraid I'm not. So.
So you're talking on a language now that I just don't. I have no idea what you're on about. Everything you've said for the last minute, you might as well have been speaking in some sort of Far Eastern kind of language. I just have no idea what
I
you
could do
said.
a pretty good statistical breakdown on how many Sambas have got tens in the last 10 years of Strictly or something like that, but
Okay. So I'm actually failing. I've got this ridiculous spreadsheet, and it's crazy because it's got like just hundreds of columns, and I'm under pressure. Under pressure, I'm actually failing. So listen, I will put it in the comments, right? I will put it in the
yes.
comments. But we tried 17. We did try 17 sort of long through balls, and that was a lot. Trust me, that's a lot. So it wasn't all keep it the ball for us. We did kind of mix it up a little bit, but I don't think any of those 17 through balls from memory. Many of them, if any of them, actually were successful. And that's the trade-off. That's the
Yeah.
risk, obviously.
Yeah, I'll forgive you failing to find it in your spreadsheet. I did put you on the spot with a unrehearsed talking point about 8 minutes ago, and you've managed to fill that. So that's pretty good going, I would say.
My head's now full of sequins and music and brightly coloured clothes and pretty people.
Well, I might convert some people on this podcast, but
I think the concentric circle between spreadsheet shaggers and strictly watchers is going to
it's
be
just me
pretty
in the
small.
middle. Yeah, it's just me. But yeah, no. Hopefully, there's not many other 7:45 kickoffs on a Saturday night between now and Christmas, and I'll be fine. But let's move on to the second half against Hearts. That's obviously where all of our goals came from. There seemed a little bit of a switch up in terms of tempo, in terms of our ability to actually create the chances. What stood out to you in terms of what we did differently in that second half that proved so much more successful than what we'd tried in the first half?
I mean, one of the kind of unpopular things that we do on this show is we do talk about the opposition. Obviously, we get some opposition analysis in before the game, and one thing that James and I like to wrestle with is the kind of question of attribution as to why did things happen? Was it because of brilliance on this side? Was it because of incompetence here, etc., etc.? I don't think we tried. I don't think we did much that was particularly different. I just think they got really tired, and we just were able to play through their press a lot easier. And once we kind of got near their box, the chances that we were creating were of a very high quality. We didn't have like 30 shots. We had a relatively small number of shots in the game. I can't remember exactly how many we had. It was something like 16 maybe, or no, 13, right? But 13 shots in the game. But from those 13 shots, excuse me, we generated well over 3 xg. So it was about over 0.2 xg per shot, which is very good. Now, obviously, there's a penalty in there, right? So that does kind of colour the data a little bit. But if you think about the situation where that Kyogo's goal, I mean that was a big chance when he was 1-on-1 with Gordon, and obviously Gordon saves it, and he's pretty much got an open goal. I think it was a defender on the line, maybe. Those are big xg chances. So StatsBomb, Opta, my model all had Celtic well over 3 xg on those sort of chances, and I think and that allowed some of the players, especially McGregor actually and Hatate. You just because of that less pressure, more space, they just flourished a little bit, more in that second half. And both McGregor and Hatate ended up nearly neck and neck on the old packing score. They reached about 160 each, which is high, very high. Hatate was 162. McGregor was 160. That's total packing score. And McGregor actually had 111 pass packing score, which is a lot for him. I mean, he was breaking the lines quite easily. Carter Vickers was actually. I thought that was one of the real highlights for me, is that Carter Vickers seemed to get stronger as the game got on, and he didn't. He didn't get subbed. He had a 92 packing score out from the back, which is brilliant because he's been very circumspect recently. He was 100% on his defensive action success rate. So, I mean, Carter Vickers made a strong case for being kind of, man of the match, really. Although not win 4-1, you like to kind of give it to one of the attackers. And I think Hatate got it from Sky Sports, and I thought that was fair enough. He was really creative in that second half. So, yeah, I think it was just time, really. Engels, I think, was the one disappointment. I think things obviously opened up when Bernardo came on. Bernardo came on and played very strongly. He had double the packing score of Engels, and he was only on for the last sort of 20 minutes. So, and he set up a goal as well for Ida. So I think all those things, but I do think they ran out of steam. As I say, they're not a team with a lot of legs in them in terms of speed. Certainly, they may have like players like Spittle is not particularly quick, but he's got a good engine. Penrice, good engine, etc. But they just lost that dynamism in the pressing. And once that pressing game kind of collapsed, which it did, then Celtic were able to kind of have a lot more fun, a lot more success in playing through. And then I think there is that thing of that two quick goals. I mean, when the second goal went in, which was only 5 minutes after the first, a lot of people were leaving the stadium at that point. And if you're a home player, that you must kind of go, oh, you know what I mean? It must be demoralising for you to see that. So yeah, it's never one thing. If I had to sort of build the attribution model and guess what would be the thing with the highest percentage, it would probably be that they just couldn't maintain that first half pressing effort.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, and that seems to be the way that things go an awful lot of the time in terms of our opposition. The one that sticks out in my mind is Falkirk in the League Cup. They gave it both barrels in the first half. They went in with the lead indeed, and they just came out in the second half and collapsed around 60 minutes just because they couldn't keep up with us in terms of physical fitness and pressing and all that stuff. So it's a legitimate way to win a football match, obviously, to have a fitter team than the opposition. So I don't see a problem with us maybe struggling to break a team down in the first half and eventually coming out on top because we just are physically stronger than them, and not necessarily in a kind of muscular sense, but just a stamina point of view. With that in mind, obviously we saw Aberdeen dropped points, Rangers dropped points over the weekend, so we've extended the lead at the top of the table. It's a busy period of football coming up between now and the new year, the busiest perhaps in the whole season, obviously allowing for any competitions that we may remain in for the rest of the season. How well do you think we can utilise the squad to capitalise on maybe some of that lack of squad depth that both Rangers and Aberdeen have in terms of trying to keep up with us? Is that something that you think we can really use this period of intense football to kind of stretch that lead out at the top?
Absolutely. I mean, and this is all going to sound a bit championship manager and a bit contrived, but what you're hoping for is you're probably looking at, and we've played on the Saturday, we've got to the Wednesday, so we've got a good amount of rest days between the Hearts away game, which was a sticky one. If you looked at the fixtures, you're thinking that's going to be a sticky one, and then the Bruges game that is such a big one because they're probably not far off Celtic in terms of their level, and we're both of them had quite good starts to their campaign, and you'd think whoever wins that game has got a right good chance of securing really the next phase football, which would be a real coup for both clubs, right? So that's a huge game. But looking at it, you got to take off some of the players like Ali Johnston, like Maeda, who again, what is becoming fairly typical, was pretty quiet after a long international break and a lot of travel. He got taken off quite quickly. Engels had started 2 games for Belgium, to be fair to the kid, which probably is a big deal. Even if physically he wasn't doing 90 minutes, he mentally, emotionally, that would have been a big thing for him. And Johnson obviously was actually playing, I think, right up to the Wednesday, maybe before the Saturday, and so probably came back quite late. So he got taken off and given rest. So that nobody, as far as I know, nobody got any knocks. Coyne's like the one that were wrapping in cotton wool because his run of form is just astonishing, and that's all good. So I think you probably go again on Wednesday with pretty much the same team. Although I think Greg Taylor did his best to play himself out the team in the first half, but he kind of redeemed himself a bit in the second. But apart from that, I think everyone was kind of okay and pretty sharp. I think Engels. I think Engels will be fine. He definitely had a difficult day on Saturday, but I'm prepared to kind of forgive him given what he'd been through in the week, sort of thing. And then you're looking at then after Bruges, you're at home to Ross County, and no intended disrespect to them, but that's a perfect chance to do similar to what we did against Dundee, where Brendan made 6 or 7 changes in that game. And it was a bit stodgy and it wasn't great, and they won 2-0, but they got the job done. And it's like, if you're going to play all these games, as I said the other week, they're not all going to be sparkly. They're going to be some stodgy fare here. And at this stage, it's about posting points. So I think Notts County, you might rock up if we played the best 11, as it were. You might be looking at a good win and lots of fun. But I suspect it will be a lot of changes and let's just get the job done. And then that gives people a rest for the trip to Pittodrie in midweek. And then after that, you've got Hibs at home, and Hibs are in a right state at the moment. So again, you'd think that's an opportunity to maybe make a few changes. So the fixtures actually, and I don't want to tempt fate, but the fixtures actually, I wish James was here to give the opposite view, actually fall quite nicely for Celtic in terms of, if you were to look at it as in terms of a rotation strategy, how would you do it? It kind of falls quite nicely. Even as I mentioned, up to the League Cup final, where after Zagreb away, which will be a really testing game, even down to the fact that it's an early tea time kickoff on the 10th of December, we've got 5 days pretty much to prepare for the League Cup final, whereas our opponents are playing a very, very difficult match on the Thursday, and we'll have only the 2 full days really to prepare. That's massive. So yes, there's a lot of games, but I think the opportunity is there to rotate, and I think the fixtures have fallen, I would say, quite favourably, and I might regret saying that, in terms of being, I think, our ability to do that.
Yeah, no, I think I quite agree. I think if you swapped the Aberdeen and the Ross County match, for example, you might have been a lot more concerned about the outcome of the Aberdeen match and the potential tiredness of our squad, or the inability to rotate as much as you might be able to against Ross County. So yeah, them falling in the order that they are is probably as favourable as it can be, without any, as you say, intended disrespect to the opposition. Although even in saying that, you are kind of disrespecting them by even acknowledging that. But this seems as good a time as any, I suppose, to bring it back to this week and to Club Brugge. Now, you've obviously been speaking to somebody who will have a lot more knowledge than any of us on Club Brugge, our opponents, during the week. Scott Coyne, who you spoke to and recorded a segment with, which we're going to head over to now. But before we do, what are your general thoughts about our current position in the Champions League, and what do we need to get out of this game against Club Brugge to really give us something to hope for going into the rest of the games?
Yeah, I think it would be really disappointing, having got the draw in Atalanta and the performance against Leipzig, for it to kind of fall flat at home to Bruges. So, but again, I think the team, the manager, everybody's in a good place in terms of the squad's pretty healthy as far as we know. Not aware of any other kind of knocks or issues. The way that they're playing is with a very kind of almost serene, calm confidence. There's no reason to suspect that will change, but these are dangerous games, right? Bruges, Zagreb, especially, I think, will to be 2 really, really good technical teams. They'll be way better than any of the teams that will play in the SPFL, for example. So, Celtic have to be at their best to get anything out of these games. But it's all there. It's all there for them. If they even if they were to get a win and a draw, let's say, I'd be astonished if it was then possible to still to not qualify for at least the next round. And it's there if they were somehow to get 2 wins. You're knocking at the door then of actually breaking into the top 8, which is just crazy. So I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but let's not kid ourselves that it's not there for the players, it's not there for the manager. I'm sure they'll be pushing for the best that they can go for. As I say, we'll hear from Scott about Bruges. I mean, they're having an interesting season. They had a bit of a internal conflict. They drew 2-2 with Beerschot, who were the bottom team in the league a couple of weeks ago, but then they won 7-0 at the weekend. Now, that sounds amazing and that sounds brilliant, but my mental memory, which I did mean to check and I forgot, so apologies, I will do that, maybe another thing to add to the comments. My mental memory of when Celtic have a 7-0 or something, get a score of that kind of magnitude, is that we're generally not very good in the next game. I suppose I'm always remembering, I think, was it the 9-0 against Aberdeen that we lost in the cup the next week, I think, to Inverness.
Exactly.
I might be misremembering that, but
No, I was at the 9-0 game against Aberdeen and thought, oh my God, nobody's going to stop us. And like you say, the exact next game, I remember it, we did lose the game. So it's not exactly the most positive omen.
So I'm not sure. So beating one of your, the league sort of cannon fodder, if you like, heavily like that. I'm sure they come into it with confidence, Bruges. But they're, as the champions, I think they're third in their league, and they've lost to they seem to lose to the good teams, and they seem very good at racking up the goals against the really poor teams. But when they've played, like, I think Genk and Ghent, I think, are above them. I might have misremembered that, but I think they lost both games, and so they lost to Dortmund, but they're that big win against Aston Villa, dodgy penalty and all that. But they did that. We'll hear more from Scott, but it's interesting that if you look at their Belgian league games, the like basketball matches, the XG on both ends is really high, and they've kind of racked up XG and not won a game, and they've had games where the opposition have racked up XG and high XG, and they've managed to get scrape a draw type of thing, and everything in between. But actually, in Europe, in the 3 or 4 European games that they've played, they've been really tight games, and they seem to play differently. They seem to play far more defensively. So this could be a nervy tight affair, I think. But we'll get on to Scott, and we'll get the expert opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll do that right now. With that said, so as that we don't have to mop anything up at the end, Alan, thank you very much for joining me this week. I'll hand over to past Alan Morrison and Scott for a rundown of what to expect in the Champions League, and we will see all of you again next week.
And you are welcome along as we continue our series of hosting and welcoming people with expertise on these horrible other clubs that we have to face, whether it's domestically or in this instance within the Champions League in Europe. It's our pleasure to welcome Scott Coyne from the Belgian Football Podcast, which I'm very confused about because I think you're Scottish or something. So what the hell are you doing in Belgium? And what are you doing on a Belgian football podcast?
Well, that's a very long story, and I get asked that a lot because you're right, well spotted. I am actually Scottish, and I am actually based in Scotland. Although I do get out to Belgium, kind of quite regularly to games and to meet with contacts inside clubs. Yeah, I mean, my involvement with Belgian football kind of came about by accident. Actually, I've always had a bit of a love affair with Belgium as a country. And I suppose my love of football meant the two were, inevitably going to come together at some point. I actually came across the founder of the Belgian Football Podcast, somebody called Ben Jackson, who used to write tactical analysis on Belgian football for a couple of publications, started the podcast round about the time of the first COVID lockdown as a way of kind of processing his thoughts for his articles. And I happened to get in touch with him because I came across it by accident and said, look, this is great. I would listen to this because I always kept a kind of cursory eye on Belgian football for a whole host of reasons. And he actually replied to me very quickly, and he said, would you be interested in coming on? And I thought he meant on a one-off basis, as a guest to talk about my own interest in Belgian football. But he went, no, let's, are you interested in trying to build this? Because I think I've found a niche here. And absolutely, he was right. There was nobody else covering Belgian football in an independent way. And to the extent that we try to do, because we're not club specific, we're interested in everybody, and it's just kind of exploded for us over the last 4 years. So much so that kind of I was able to set up my own independent football consultancy where I do a little bit of work for players and agents and clubs in Belgium as well. And the landscape in Belgium is actually very different. Clubs will come to you. Open access is much easier. You find that clubs seek to control narratives much less, and I think they've got the balance right between working with the media and trying to control it, which is kind of a lost cause as well. So it seems to have worked out very well for us.
Well, I think what you said there at the end would be received in as if it was said in Flemish for most Scottish clubs: open and transparent and engaging with media and independent journalists. I mean, that I don't think they've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a problem in Scotland. I think the quality of the media generally in the mainstream is not really there. I mean, I was talking about the BFP being independent. I think that's a big attraction to the people who listen to our show every week and who listen to the specials that we do with guests. I think clubs in Belgium recognise the importance of reaching out beyond their own kind of channels. And in fact, slightly more of our listeners now are based in Belgium. Around 60% of the people who listen to the show each week are actually Belgian. So that tells us we're meeting the needs that the mainstream media in Belgium certainly isn't. But that's not really a surprise. But yeah, I mean, that's something that's changed quite a lot for us. A lot of our listeners were UK based before, but now the balance is tipped the other way. And I think that's probably quite a good sign.
Well, I'll ask the first footballing question, then I'll kick it over to my compatriot Alan here. So, given none of us have any kind of real expertise, when I say us, certainly Alan and I, but my guess is the vast majority of Celtic supporters don't have a good anchoring of domestic football in Belgium and Club Brugge's kind of place in that. Alan and I have looked at Bruges relative to the benchmarking that we do from a European landscape perspective on, player recruitment, player trading models, kind of revenue and all of that, how clubs do in Europe based off of all that stuff. So we look at Club Brugge through that lens and how Celtic have done or not done in many instances in that regard over the last decade. So just generally, how would you place Club Brugge within the context of Belgian football currently and kind of how that's evolved over the last few years?
Well, I think most football fans will know that, Anderlecht are probably still, historically speaking, the most well-known club and most successful club in Belgium. They've won 34 titles. Club Brugge have only won 19. So, they're quite a way behind. But Club Brugge have dominated the modern footballing landscape in Belgium, certainly for the last 10 years. I mean, they've won 5 of the last 7 titles. There's a couple of interludes in there. Antwerp went and won the double a couple of years ago, much to everyone's surprise. And Genk have won a title in there. But Club have been the masters of Belgian football, certainly for the last decade. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Fundamentally, they've been a very well run club for quite a long time now, both administratively and financially. They've benefited from playing European football, normally at Champions League level, consistently for the majority of that time. So all of the riches and rewards that come with that from just being part of it consistently have been reinvested into the club, particularly on the pitch. And the other aspect of it is they've been extraordinarily good over a period of time now in the transfer market in terms of really high turnover in fees. I mean, some of the deals, I've been joking to people for a few years now, do they take a gun into negotiations? Because sometimes some of the fees they've been getting for some of the players, really extraordinary. I mean, Igor Thiago, who left not too long ago to go to Brentford fee in excess of 30 million, which still now is ludicrous, particularly when you consider he got a really bad injury not long after he arrived. So, they've barely seen him on the pitch. So they've been really good at doing their footballing business and reinvesting that back in the right way. And looking at it more historically, Club Brugge as a club don't really become a player in the Belgian football landscape until the 1970s. They're kind of nowhere. It's really about Anderlecht and Standard Liège up to that point. And it kind of changes with a sort of change in ownership as well. And historically as well, at that point, there's a change economically in Belgium from a historical perspective. And this is where it's a little bit similar to Glasgow, actually. You have a period where the traditional economic industries, the coal and the steel industries in Belgium, that really were the economic powerhouses in the French-speaking parts of Belgium, in the south, the Walloon parts of the country, which are not where Club Brugge are from, funnily enough, used to really be the powerhouse behind why Standard Liège did so well for a long time, and Anderlecht, big French-speaking clubs. But once those industries die, the economic base in the country pivots very much in Flanders' favour, and that means that more money starts to flow into Flanders and into the football clubs there as well, and that has helped Club Brugge historically too. But fundamentally, they've had some very, very good business people inside the club over the last 20 years or so, which has really seen the club grow, and they're now certainly financially speaking quite a bit ahead of all the other clubs, and even Anderlecht, who would traditionally be their biggest rivals in a footballing sense, economically can't compete with them at the moment. They've spent a lot of time trying to get their own house in order, which they're starting to do now. They are making progress on that, but very few people can compete with them in the transfer market.
So based on what you said there, Scott, around the transfer model, and obviously a high turnover of players, but maintaining success through that period, have they maintained also a very distinct identity in terms of the style of play, tactical approaches that they adopt? Because I noticed that the current manager, Nicky Heyman, the way that they're playing this season and last, it very much reflects his past as a manager. But whether that's informed by how Brugge play or Brugge have adapted to him is, I guess, my question. So have they got a consistent style of play and a consistent identity in terms of that?
Not really. I mean, they don't. They lack, and I think this would be a fair criticism of them as a club. They've lacked an effective kind of director of football role in there. They do have that role. But there's been no. You would expect there to be some kind of template at most clubs, and that generally wouldn't change no matter who the coach is. The coach would be expected to work within that, and certainly wouldn't really be allowed to change it. So, effective clubs with the right structure in place will have that template tactically for how they want to play, which will be applied across all levels. The senior squad, we look to play that way, as will the development squad and the younger squads below that, and players trained to to fit that system, coaches picked to fit that system, for example. And I think it would be a fair criticism to level at Club Brugge that they've not really applied that. I think that's partly to do with the demands of the need for constant success, and the expectation of their fan base is similar to Celtic fans in the sense that they would be expected to win every game. Because the Belgian league is stronger than the Scottish league, that doesn't always happen, and they've made changes. Yeah, sometimes off the hoof. I mean, I think in Belgium, it's worth reiterating that clubs tend to change managers very, very quickly sometimes. Often you don't get the benefit of the doubt sometimes, or that leeway. You will immediately come under really intense pressure, after 4 or 5 dodgy results. They're very proactive about that in Belgium, and that's partly to do with the league system works as well, because after 30 games it becomes the championship playoffs, so the top 6 sides at that point then fight out for the championship. And this is where it gets really interesting, because some people might not know at that stage here's the quirky bit: the points get halved. So if you're leading the table by 10 points, you've only got 5 points. And just as a really good example of this time, well, a little bit later than this time, but when we got to the playoff stage last season in Belgium, coming into that, Bruges actually finished fourth. A massive 19 points behind the then leaders, Union Saint-Gilloise, who then went on to lose, much to everybody's surprise, their first 4 games in the playoffs. Bruges won 9 of the 10 games and managed to claw back and win the title in the end. But they wouldn't have been able to do that but for that curious points having, which is something I personally have never liked, because I think it penalises the whole principle of consistency, which is the foundation of what winning championships is about. But it's a system that's been in Belgium for a long time and is really about kind of artificially generating interest later on in the season as well. We could probably do a whole podcast on that. It's something we talk about a lot, whether that's a good or a bad thing. But yeah, they don't have a kind of in-house style or template, so the coaches are allowed to kind of change things. They have had a bit of an issue recently that's worth highlighting, and this isn't something that's unique to Nicky Hyen or anything he's done. I would say this issue goes back arguably 3 years, and Nicky was quite open about this just before the recent international break at a press conference. He said, look, I think we've got a bit of an attitude problem at the moment, and what he was referring to was this frustrating thing around Club Brugge where they go through periods where they fail to dominate games. They drop points that they shouldn't. They lose games that they shouldn't. They don't win games that they should. You know, they can play very well for 60 minutes and then have a half-hour period where it looks like they've just dialed out. And this is actually what led to Ronnie Deila losing his job at the end of last season. Celtic fans will know him very well, of course. He couldn't quite conquer this sort of... and I think it's a mentality thing. I think that's what it is. Some of those players, I think, who've been there for a long time, perhaps struggle with the expectation of having to win every game, which psychologically is, not for everybody. That's quite a unique thing and only really applies to what is really quite a small number of clubs if you think about it around the world. So Nicky Hyen was just acknowledging that, and that's something that's gone back years, but Club Brugge have become very good at peaking at the right times in the season, and you have to manage that form in Belgium if you're going to win the league because of the way the championship works.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at their kind of... And I won't say that I've studied them in terms of watched them on video a lot, but a cursory glance at their sort of 19, 20 games that they've played this season. And there's games where they absolutely, dominate possession to Celtic levels. I mean, Celtic can commonly get 70% of the ball in Scottish games, as you're probably aware. And if you look at, they seem to be very good at absolutely taking apart the weaker teams in the league. They're the good sort of flat track bullies in that sense. But then they seem to have a lot of league games that against teams that are probably smaller than them, where it's kind of a basketball match and there's loads of chances at both ends, and it's kind of 50-50 as to who comes out of that. But then you then switch to the Champions League, and they seem to have been playing in a much tighter way. The XG of both teams is much lower. There doesn't seem to be as many chances. The goal scoring's massively reduced, whereas in league games, there seems to be chances massively at both ends. So do they adapt their style for Europe against all opposition, or will it just be against the Dortmunds and the Aston Villas? And do you think they'll come out and play against Celtic? They seem to be very adaptable, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think they are. I think there's an argument to be made that perhaps they take the domestic game for granted a little bit. I think, that comes back to what we're just talking about this inability sometimes to dominate games consistently. There is a feeling in Belgium that because of the way the league works again, that perhaps you can afford to drop some points that you probably shouldn't, and you will still be okay. And in Europe, they know they have to step it up. That's a different thing entirely. I think they tend to play the same way in Europe. Interestingly, this season, actually, in the Champions League, they've been a little bit more cautious, particularly with the away fixtures. They've been playing with an extra defensive midfielder in there as well, just to protect the back four a little bit in the away games in particular. So they're very sensitive to the fact that they're almost certainly going to see less of the ball, regardless of who the away opposition is, and that should certainly be the case against Celtic as well. And they're coming into an environment there, particularly in European nights, that is very well known, and how Club Brugge players respond to that is going to be interesting to see as well. I think this is an incredibly finely balanced tie, and I was quite excited when I saw this come out for a whole number of reasons. Both clubs will have looked at this and identified it as a very winnable game for both of them, and they actually play very similar systems on the whole, so it's going to be really interesting to see which coach decides to pivot first in a tactical sense and what they do. I wouldn't expect Celtic to make too many changes because they're playing at home. They know their strongest side. There's no real reason for them to change that. I suppose the question marks are around how might Nicky Hyen set up to play against this Celtic side, particularly when the systems are really quite similar.
Well, that leads me to, so I looked fairly closely at the two away fixtures, as you mentioned, because that did jump out to me as far as it looked like they were doing something materially different than domestically or against, kind of, we'll call it like equal-ish opposition in Europe at home. So what I've seen looking at like heat maps and the stats, I did watch. I figured it out. I couldn't remember when I was talking to Alan before we went live. I'm pretty sure it was it Aston Villa they played, or was it Dortmund?
Yeah,
it was Aston Villa. Yeah. So I think it was the Villa game I watched. And so it's kind of like a very compact mid block with what I'll call sucker punching high pressing. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean in that they pick their spots intelligently to press the center backs kind of centrally. They don't seem to get dispersed wide with the high press and create those gaps. They tend to be very kind of rigid and centralized in that selective pressing, but like militantly pressing in that mid block, like very effectively, very robustly, and making it very difficult to break their lines and to kind of progress the ball. So am I reading that right with the heat maps? Like, is there an ambush element to their pressing when they do push it high? Because they've actually generated quite a lot of shots off of a high press without doing it that much, which again, when I see that kind of dichotomy, that to me speaks to usually people are doing it really intelligently.
Yeah, I think that would be fair, and I think a lot of that is down to the two wide men as part of their front three. You've got Andreas Skov Olsen on one side, who Kasper Schmeichel will know a lot about. I'm sure there's been discussions internally at Celtic about that, and Christos Zolis, the Greek winger, on the other side, and then club legend at Club Brugge, Hans van Aken, who's the captain, who is I suppose in a way you could kind of compare him to Callum McGregor. Actually, he's been at the club a long time. Is incredibly important, I think, in the dressing room and on the pitch. He can play as a holding midfielder, but also in a more advanced role in the hole as well. He's going to be very important for Club Brugge if they're going to do well in this game. But yeah, I mean, I think much like their local rivals in Bruges, Cercle Bruges, who play a really high intense press. They do pick their moments. There is a slight side to them that is. Yeah, it goes back to this cautious thing that I was kind of alluding to earlier, particularly in the away fixtures, where they do try to be a little bit more solid and kind of pick their moments. And there's an element of feeling their way into games sometimes and kind of picking their moments. That could become a problem for them, I think, in this game. I think if they allow Celtic to settle early and set the tempo, it could become very difficult to work your way into a game under those circumstances. I think it's important from a Club Brugge perspective, and they've probably had a look at this, that they start strongly and try and take the initiative as much as possible. Otherwise, there's a danger this game could get away from them, and they could find themselves sitting too deep far too early, and that just invites pressure and trouble. So there are some quite obvious pitfalls for them here, I think, if they don't just slightly adjust perhaps the way that they would maybe approach a game like this.
I mean, often in our podcast, James plays the role of the worrier, and I try and be the one that thinks of the sort of upbeat upside to things. So in that spirit, then, looking at some of their performances last season, I think they got to the Conference League semi-finals. Is that right? Yeah. They even in the European games, with the ball now. So we've talked a little bit about off the ball. So I'm talking about with the ball now. They seem to. They're very interesting when you just look at the data, because they have very high possession, very high volume of passes, but also a lot of long balls as well. So they're quite happy to keep the ball, and then go long very quickly. And what it seemed that they were doing was that they were pushing their fullbacks really wide. The defenders were spread all across the pitch. They pushed their front three right up and high, and then there was this massive oasis of space in the middle of the pitch. And I'm just thinking, have they found issues in transition, really, from the opposition if they do get their press right? Because I mean, Celtic have got three incredibly fast forwards, and if Bruges were to lose the ball from in that setup, the way that I've seen them set up with a very, very aggressive and wide starting position, and I accept they're probably quite good technical at keeping the ball across the back, but if they were to get pressed and disrupted, Celtic are very good in those situations. I just wonder if that's a trap that they may try and avoid, or do you think they'll be that aggressive with the ball when they come to Celtic Park?
Well, at this level, transitions tend to be the deciding factor often in games, because at that level, obviously, the quality of the players on the pitch tends to tell in the end at some point in the game. I think Club have suffered essentially from not taking their chances across their Champions League games so far this season. They played very well against Dortmund at home in the opening game, probably well enough to get something out of the game, but lost it because they didn't take any of their chances, and Dortmund took all of their chances, even though they didn't play that well. So it's the classic, it's the classic.
We can relate, Scott. We can relate.
Absolutely.
We've been there. We've been there.
Yep. It's that clarion call of playing at this level effectively, and it's kind of it's a great transition. Another transition back to what we were just talking about just making sure that they start well in this game. Otherwise, I think they could be in trouble. They normally don't get caught out when they leave that space. They're normally able to control most of the pitch, even in the areas where they leave themselves light. And I think this probably relates to why Nicky Hine has chose to play an extra holding midfielder, particularly in the away European games, just to try and protect the space a little bit. Because the two wing backs, in this case Maxim de Kuiper, who's a really exciting young wing back on one side, and his compatriot on the other side, Joaquin Cease, who's even younger, who's only made his breakthrough this season, both have been criticised a little bit for leaving themselves a little bit exposed and being overzealous at times. So judging those transitions is going to be crucial. And I think actually the fullbacks in this game for both sides are going to have a massive say in where the points go at the end of the game, I think.
Sorry, Jane, just one thing on that then. Just so De Kuiper he's on the right, is that correct? The right.
Yeah.
Does he want to get forward all the time?
Yeah, he's a very offensive wing back, very offensive, and I think still he's 23, and he will still improve, obviously, but he has been exposed a little bit, particularly at this level on a few occasions, and he recently broke into the international side for the first time, and he had the same issue really. And not quite judging some of his transitions, and when really he should have been tracking back more than he was a little bit. You can get away with that domestically most of the time. But him and Joaquin Cease on the other side, I think need to be very careful in a game like this, particularly when you've got players like Dyson Maeda who will be all over you and not allow you to settle. And Nicholas Coyne has been in great form as well. So there are a number of players who could cause some of these Club Brugge players problems if they're not attuned to the environment they're coming into, and what to expect. And I think the best thing to do when playing Celtic is to try. To try and be offensive and play your own game, actually, particularly at this level. And that's what makes it such an exciting game, because it's so evenly matched. This game actually has the potential to have a lot of goals in it. I've gone and jinxed it now, of course, but, I think we could conceivably see, a lot of goals in this game.
Well, on brand, after all that exciting talk about goals and attacking, I'm going to bring it back into the mud with the big uglies, as we say in American football, which is the equivalent is the two seasoned citizens that we have between the pipes, the two keepers. And so one of the criticisms I had of Celtic really over the last few seasons since Forster's departure is if we were going to play an attacking style of play, Ange ball, for example, throw caution to the wind and go all out. We better have an elite shot stopper to deflect away the barrage of balls in transition that will be inevitably coming back the other way, a la Real Madrid and the other teams that have perpetrated that offense against us at times. So Schmeichel has begun to give us some of that, which is good. But I used to reference Mr. Mignolet and the smartness of Bruges having recruited him when he was still relatively young. I think he was 32, maybe 31 when he first arrived. But he's not that anymore. He's starting to get on that aging curve. So I'm curious, because I haven't looked at the numbers yet. How's he performing? Is he still kind of peak Mignolet as I envision him as a guy who can, I think it was 2 seasons ago. I mean, he basically got the team into the knockout stages of the Champions League almost single-handedly. We were standing on his head like I said, a Fraser Forster against Barcelona level of a group stage that he seemed to have. So where's he at in his kind of aging curve? Is he still peak Mignolet?
He's certainly very close to it, I think. And he has been winning awards in Belgium in recent years, actually, for being the best goalkeeper, which is kind of ironic because there's an argument. There's a couple of other goalkeepers around who I think probably should have taken that mantle. The thing he does very well, actually, and has always done historically, is making the big saves at the big moments. That's what Simon Mignolet does. Sometimes there's the odd gaff at a point that you don't expect. We've seen that domestically as well from him, but generally in the big games, he's there when required, and he still does that. And in fact, last season actually, he made some huge saves in games that made the difference from a points perspective in allowing them to win the title. So he's more than. Yeah, his value to Club Brugge is pretty immeasurable, to be honest. He had an injury not too long ago that had him out of the side for a few weeks at kind of a key point in the season, and that really asked some questions of Club Brugge. They were lucky in that they had a very good young goalkeeper who was able to come in and replace him, who did so well that a lot of Club Brugge fans were kind of hoping that he might retain his spot. But such as Simon Mignolet's kind of untouchableness in selection terms, he was always going to come back. I mean, definitely a key player for them. Scott Olsen's another one to kind of look out for. Solis, Maxim de Kuiper, who I already mentioned, and Hans van Aken as well, incredibly important for them. They are mostly injury-free at the moment as well, so they'll be travelling with a pretty much full-strength squad. There's a couple of injuries. First choice striker Gustav Nielsen's out. He's been out since September. So he may travel, but I wouldn't expect him to play at all. So they're going to be missing, I think, Gustav Nielsen and probably Bjorn Meyer, who hasn't been playing for a while anyway, who would normally be kind of first choice left back. So they're pretty much full strength. We will see if that remains the case after they've got a league fixture, obviously, this weekend as well.
So on that then, obviously, when you look at this season, the main threat, as you said, seems to come from an attacking sense, seems to come from the wingers, and Scott Olsen, I think, plays off the right, doesn't he? And Celtic's left hand side of the defence is easily their weakest part of the team, and most teams in Scotland attack Celtic's left hand side like massively, predominantly, because on the right hand side with Carter Vickers and Alistair Johnson, that's a very strong, not just physically but intelligently and positionally a very strong side of the defence. The left side, not quite as good. So Skov Olsen match up with Greg Taylor, that's kind of giving me a bit of a worry. But I did wonder, because obviously there are a lot of talent on the wing. Skov Olsen, Nusa, Solis that you mentioned, really talented players that kind of give me the fear a little bit. But they don't seem to have a settled centre forward. Now you mentioned Nilsson's injury. Is that a misreading of me, or they don't seem to be getting a lot of goals from the striking position, I suppose, and doesn't seem to be settled as to who plays there.
Yeah, again, that's been another long-standing problem. I mean, Gustav Nielsen came in the summer for a 6 million fee from Union Saint-Gilloise, another club in Belgium, where he'd been doing very well. And I think they chose to go with him because he knew the Belgian league, and I think they felt he was a safe option and a comparatively cheap one. He also, because of his height, offers you a lot of physicality. He's very difficult to play against in that sense. So he really started the season as the first choice striker and was actually doing okay after a slow start. Gets quite a bad Achilles injury, which he's been out with for a while now and is ongoing. The other strikers at the club, and this is definitely something to watch out for when the team sheets come out, who's going to start now? It will either be Ferran Jutgla, the Spanish striker, or Romeo Vermaat, who's quite an exciting young Belgian striker who's come through Club Brugge's academy at Club Next. A player I like a lot, technically very good. I think it's likely that Jutgla will start, and I say that on the basis that that's what Nicky has chosen to do, certainly at the Champions League level this season. Vermaat has played a lot, but that's mainly been domestically. He's not seen that much game time at this level. He's gone with Jutgla, who hasn't done that well. I mean, technically, he's quite an exciting player, low centre of gravity, Messi-esque in that sense. He's kind of quite tricky, small, diminutive player, good technical ability, definitely capable of a bit of brilliance out of nothing. So he does have that ability, but, he hasn't been playing as regularly as he would like. And in fact, he played more regularly last season. So I think they felt that the physicality that Nielsen offers them was kind of missing from their own domestic game. But it's something they've struggled with in recent years. A lot of the goals have been coming from elsewhere. A lot of the attacking midfielders have been providing, a good level of goals for probably at least 3 or 4 years now. So much so that it's kind of balanced out a little bit. They have definitely lacked a striker for a while now who is a, out and out lethal striker, who's able to go and score you 20 plus goals a season. We've not seen that from that position. So they've kind of struggled. And that explains why they didn't spend big on a new striker this summer when probably they needed to. And there was a worry coming into this season's Champions League that from a striking perspective, there wasn't enough quality there to make a difference at this level. And it's a big ask of your attacking midfielders to kind of fill the void at that level as well as doing it domestically. So it's an interesting one, that, but I think Jutgla will probably get the nod.
Okay, just so James, sorry, just one more from me on going sort of switching it to the other end of the park. Then, so Celtic will more than likely start with Kyogo Furuhashi as the main striker. How do you see him in terms of that matchup with the Bruges central defenders? What do you think, that's something they'll be comfortable with, or do you think he's somebody that the way he plays might cause them problems, or what do you think? What do you think that matchup looks like?
Well, I think he definitely could cause. The two centre halves I would expect to start are Brandon Mekla and Joel Ordonez. I think they'll probably start unless Nicky kind of switches it round a little bit, which he does do sometimes. Depending on the injury situations, he might move one of them out a bit wider. I think. Furuhashi's got, the very real potential to cause problems there. Technically, he's an exceptionally gifted player. Mekala is a very competent defender, and he's good physically. He's the sort of defender who likes to leave his foot in a little bit sometimes, just to remind you he's there, and to do so early. Joel Ordonez is younger, so he needs the experience of Mekala beside him, but is a good young player. I think they'll be very wary of Furuhashi's pace, I think, particularly. So that's probably why I suspect Nicky Hyen is likely to play that extra sitting midfielder again. that will probably be Rafael Onyedika, who's very good in that role. He has a reckless side to his game. He has had a few red cards for late challenges. He's not a dirty player at all, but sometimes he mistimes his tackles and gets himself in trouble that he shouldn't. And he's been warned about that recently, that he needs to kind of get that out of his game so it doesn't cause them problems at this level. So I would be very surprised if they didn't just look to shore that up a little bit to give them a bit more protection. Equally, Ardon Yashiri, the Swiss midfielder, can sit a little bit deeper if need be as well to provide additional cover. That kind of midfield diamond of Onyedika and Yashiri and Van Aken has a bit of flexibility in it. Van Aken normally plays slightly further forward, but Yashiri can do that as well. So it'll be interesting to see whether Van Aken sits a bit deeper to perform a kind of similar function to Callum McGregor and being able to pick up balls and distribute them effectively into offensive positions. And obviously Arne Engels obviously has an important role from Celtic's perspective in this game, because he's becoming better all the time at making line-breaking passes from deep as well. The offensive side of his game is getting better all the time and is kind of quite underrated. And of course, he will know a lot of these players already, having come through Club Brugge's academy. You'll know Nicky Hyen, they'll have crossed paths as well, because Nicky's been at club for a number of years now. So they will know each other as well. So this is going to be a reunion of a lot of friends, I think.
Well, I thought for sure, Scott, with that loaded question from Alan, that you would seize on the opportunity to wind up our audience and state that Dedrick Boyata was clearly going to start this game and make his first appearance this season at center back. But I can't believe he's not starting at his ripe old age of 34 at Club Brugge. But so my last question, and you've been very generous with your time here. I appreciate it. So I've seen Bruges as kind of my trap team, meaning that it looks, particularly the way they've been playing in Champions League, is my concern with Celtic as I see vulnerability in the high press at times, on the ball, our center back, and even our fullbacks at time can be a little sloppy on the ball when put under pressure, and we can give pretty grotesque passes away at times against high pressure. The flip side of that is teams that will play a little bit more narrow and deeper, which sounds like Bruges has done pretty skillfully in the Champions League at times, and then hit on the counter. That's the part. So I hear the pieces, like the way you've described the pieces of Bruges make me concerned. Fast wingers, tricky. This dude at center forward who's tricky, can make something out of nothing. And you got the crafty older midfielder who can ping balls around. And I'm saying, oh boy, okay, I hear these components. Well, has any of this manifested? Like, are they actually dangerous on the counter when they suck in the Aston Villas or the better teams that they've faced in the Champions League? Have they been threatening on the counterattack?
Yeah, they have. And I think the main point to take away from it here is, yes, they absolutely have. But what they've failed to do generally is take the opportunities, when they've created them. If they'd done that, I think they'd be sitting in a much better situation. I mean, a couple of seasons ago, before the revised format came in, they managed to get out of the group stage for the first time, which nobody expected them to do. And that was partly because they did take their opportunities that year, and that got them out of the group phase into the knockout stages, much to everybody's surprise, including Club Brugge fans. I think, in fact, they were doing better in Europe at that stage than they were domestically, quite noticeably so. So obviously that way that they'd adapted their game in Europe obviously suited them at that point. But yeah, I mean, the answer to that is absolutely yes. But they've failed to kind of be clinical. And they're obviously going to need to do that if they're going to get anything out of this game. Equally, I think if Celtic put them under a lot of pressure and take their opportunities, which they've been doing, they've been good in Europe. Apart from one particular game, obviously, where it was the perfect storm of circumstances against them this season. Away in Dortmund, then Celtic have a lot of reasons to be hopeful of getting a result on the night. But as I was saying, I think there's potentially a lot of goals goals in this game, and it could be a very good watch, I think.
Well, let's bottom line it then, because you're the expert here with exposure to both. You're going to know more about the two parties in this situation than the vast majority of people. So based off all that we've discussed, all the work and the prep that you've done for this game, you're gonna pick a 1-1 draw, aren't you? That's what you're going to say. You're going to chicken out and go 1-1 draw. No, a 3-3 draw maybe. From what you've been saying with the goal scoring. But now, what is your sense? Like, do you skew one way or the other as far as the strengths and weaknesses as far as the matchup?
Well, if it's as high scoring as I think it could be, 3-3 would be, from a neutral perspective, kind of a great watch. I'm not neutral for various reasons, partly because I watch Belgian football, but partly because of my own club allegiances. And I actually used to have a season ticket at Celtic for a number of reasons. So I was very excited when this fixture kind of came up, partly because it's the first time, obviously, they've played each other competitively, but here's an opportunity to kind of get to a game where, it's going to be quite an odd experience for me on lots of levels. Celtic are definitely favourites, I think, partly because of their form, partly because of the home advantage, and obviously partly because of the extra weight that comes with that home advantage, especially on a European night, I think. Often, you have the cliches about the extra man and crowds, but actually, it's a couple of extra men when that place is kind of properly rocking, and that's not an environment that everybody's comfortable coming into. So Celtic are definitely favourites for me, particularly because of the way that club have approached games tactically in Europe this season. I think maybe psychologically that desire to just be a little bit more protectionist plays into Celtic's hands a little bit. Personally, I think I would like to see Nicky be a little bit more offensive. I think he needs to kind of leave that at the door and try and have a real go at Celtic, I think. Club arguably need to win a little bit more, I think. I think if they were to leave with a point, it wouldn't be the end of the world for them because they're still in the mix. But I think they need to leave it all out there on the pitch. I think if they don't, then I think they might regret the opportunity, because looking at their fixtures, it's as brutal as it gets. They've got Sporting Lisbon, Juventus and Manchester City still to come. So arguably there's not a lot of points, whereas this is a game that if they perform, they could win. So it'll be really interesting to see if he chooses to put the brakes on or whether he chooses to kind of go for it. And I would like to see him do that, just from an entertainment point of view.
Yeah, our last guest that we had on, David Sumpter, would agree with you. He's I don't know if you know David, but professor of applied maths. He's studied this, and he would conclude exactly the same. If you've got two teams that are kind of evenly matched, even if you're a little bit below the opposition, it pays you more to go for it than it does to be defensive. So I think you're spot on. You've obviously read his book, but I'm with you. I hope they go defensive for that reason.
Well, once again, Scott, tremendous. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thank you.
Belgian Football Podcast. Where else can our audience consume your content and your Belgian football expertise? We're going to ignore your Scottish input, by the way. We've got the monopoly on that, but you go ahead and let us know where we can get the Belgian content.
Yeah, so we produce a weekly show which covers all the news and action across the Belgian football landscape at all levels, incidentally. We also try and cover the national team as much as possible. So you can find us at Belgian Podcast on Twitter. If you search for the Belgian Football Podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts on, you will find us pretty quickly. And if you want, good quality independent coverage of Belgian football in English, then we are the best and only place to come. And more people seem to be doing that, which is good. You can also find me individually at Scott_Coyne. And if you want to get in touch with a consultancy, you can find me at Coyne Consultant as well. So you can find me in loads of places. That is, if you don't hear me on the radio, where my voice is sometimes and occasionally on television as well.
Well,
Excellent.
we will find you in all those locations. So thanks again, Scott, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.